Good morning. Welcome to the Meet the Masters webinar series. I'm Lawrence Geller, the moderator of the ForAdvisorsOnly.com. Today we have Roger McMillan with us. Roger is a CFP, CLU, and a CHFC. Born in England, Roger McMillan came to Canada in 1956 after his father was demobbed from the British Army and returned from Tripoli, Libya. Roger graduated from the University of Toronto, majoring in economics in 1971. And he joined Canada Life as an actuarial student. During that time, he helped design and develop Canada Life's income replacement product. A member of LUAC and CAVA, and now Advocis since 1972. He is past president of the Toronto chapter in 1993, and he served on various national committees as well as on the board of directors of Advocis during the merger of KFund CAFP, culminating in his being elected the chairman of the Board of TFAC, Advocis, in 2006. During his tenure, Roger also chaired the Best Practices Committee, and he's a member of the Conference for Advanced Life Underwriting, CALU. As chair of the Ontario Political Advocacy Committee for Advocis, and chair of the Board of Directors, and one of the founders of Advocis Protective Association, the Errors Emissions Company, sponsored by Advocis, for the benefit of advisors, Roger has been very involved with Advocis and all of the really seminal projects of it since about 2000. Roger operates his own estate planning, insurance, and employee benefit firm, working with small business owners. He's an accomplished scuba diver, and he enjoys golf. Roger lives in Halton Hills, which is just down the street from me, on the equestrian farm with his wife, Fiona, and it has for the past 25 years. I'll be interviewing Roger. We have now booked webinars through the end of 2024, and we are booking for 2025. Good morning, Roger.
Good morning, Lawrence. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Welcome for the webinar series, and thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Tell me, how did you get started in the business? You know, you were an actuarial student, but that doesn't tell me much.
Well, I got started. It's kind of like one of those accidents, really. When I was in university, I loved economics so much I wanted to actually get my PhD in it and teach it at the University of Toronto. But life got in the way, and we started a family, and I had to get an honest job. So my initial instinct was to look at accounting firms, and I had 4 or 5 interviews with accounting firms and 1 interview with an insurance company. And the person that interviewed me with Canada Life was David Neal, actually, when he was head of the U.S. division. So I ended up having a very unfortunate dinner meeting with a major accounting firm, in which I ended up standing up and putting all the money I had in my pocket down on the table, saying I've got to leave because they really weren't answering any of my questions. And so I had to hitchhike home because I had no money in my pocket. So I did that, and the day or 2 after that, I went to see David Neal, and he hired me on the spot. So I ended up in the U.S. division of field services, and initially for about a year and a half, and where I ended up in front of a 50-pound Frieden calculator doing minimum deposit illustrations by hand. So I actually learned how a life insurance policy worked and how dividends, when and how dividends were paid. And we used to do these 14-column illustrations by hand. You put your numbers in, you pull the lever, and the thing would just rattle, rock and roll on your desk for about 30 seconds, and the numbers would come up, and you put the number down on the column, and you start all over again. So in the United States, they had this minimum deposit technique where you paid 4 out of the first 7 premiums. Your interest was tax deductible, regardless of whether there was an investment behind it or not, for the rest of the life of the policy. And in fact, that's how Universal Life came to be. Transamerica realized that their policy loan block was increasing and increasing and increasing from all these general agents across the United States doing this. And they decided that they didn't have any money to invest, or at least the money pool they had to invest was being reduced by all these agents out there in the field. So that's how Universal Life really was started. Anyway, so that's how I got into business. So I did that, and then I helped design the disability, and we used to we were there from 8 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night for about 6 months. And I got my first raise, which was $600 for the year, not by the hour. And I resigned on the spot. So as I was looking for work, I interviewed with the Ministry of Finance in Ontario and the Toronto Metros as their marketing director with the soccer team, and then somebody suggested I go speak to Tony Laws, which I did, and so I ended up becoming an agent in the Toronto City branch at Canada Life.
So, all right, so you're an insurance agent now with an actuarial background, an economics background. Where did you look for your clients?
Well, that's the biggest problem I had. Like Tony started us on the Grantham system. So basically we had to figure out, how to make 30 phone calls a day. And trust me, trying to find 30 people for me to call every day was a task. And, and we went through the system, 10-3-1, 10 prospects, 3 fact-finding interviews, 1 client that's year and another client the following year. We did all that and I followed it faithfully. But I just didn't have enough going into the hopper at the top end because when I was in university, I went to class. I arranged my classes, so I was doing 4 classes, 4 days of class, and then I drove taxi for 3 days to make some money. And so I didn't have a huge social network. And so it all started when I was talking to a prospective client, and he said to me, he was in the laser transit business, and he says, you got really lucky. And I questioned him as to what he was talking about. And he took me by the hand and said, let's come out here. He said, I got to go out to all these construction sites, whether it's snowing or raining and slogging through the mud, set up my equipment. You got all your prospects lined up in a row here. So I ended up starting knocking on commercial doors, basically. And I did quite well the first couple of years. I talked about, stock redemption. I talked about buy-sell agreements. I talked about estate planning. And so because I had some accounting background, I knew how to read a financial statement. And I just, it was educating clients. I felt it was important for me to help educate the clients as to what the vagaries of being in business were all about. And because I grew up with my dad having his own business too. So I worked there. It's the only place I've ever been fired from. And it's so and me and my friend from high school, I got us both fired. So that was my natural, I felt was my natural market. And because I really didn't want to go and talk to my friends about it. Because they had no money and they were living a single life and they were off drinking and partying, and I figured they wouldn't be good clients. So I built up my initial clientele was people who own businesses, and I just kept when I joined Advocis, my focus was learning what I needed to learn to help them figure out what they were going to do with their businesses and where they wanted to go.
So you mentioned buy-sell agreements and key person insurance, key man insurance, as we used to call it.
Yeah.
How did you open that discussion with these clients?
Well, mostly asking questions. I said, how long have you been in business? You start off with easy questions for them to answer. How did you get into this business? Kind of what you're asking me now. And just you listen to the word they're talking about. So you have a family, and you start completing your fact-finding interview. And I said, the way I work is I work on a 2-interview system. My first interview, all I want to do is learn as much as I can about you, your assets, your liabilities, your goals, what you hope to accomplish for your family. And then I will take all that information back and figure out how I can help you. And so in that whole process, I said, do you have a problem with that process? And everybody said no. And then I asked them if they knew how an estate works. And I had this funnel diagram. I don't know whether you've ever seen it before, but it's a funnel diagram. And I use it on every first interview I have. And sometimes it's simple, sometimes it's more complicated. So, I went from a single corporation, and sometimes a sole proprietor, to prospects that had 28 companies, right? So the funnel diagram changes based on the person that you're speaking to. I've learned to do that over the years. And So once you start asking people questions, see, I believe, and I learned this through Granham and through people in the office and Tony Laws, and if the key to dealing with people is asking questions and actually listening to what they have to say. And when you do that, you build trust. And I think that's what I think I did in my career. The only problem was I was too lazy to work as hard as other people.
That's not been my experience with you, but we'll move on from there. So, okay, so now you're talking with these clients. And did you only talk about the business, or did you bore further down? I mean, just
Oh, no. You ask questions. I ask questions about their family and how does your spouse support you in the business? Is she in the business? And you get answers like, yeah, she comes in and does reception work, or she does the bookkeeping, or she does this and that. So you find out how involved they are. Do you have any partners or shareholders? Oh yeah, I got a guy that put some money in the business. He's got 40%. So that helps me build up a case for buy-sell agreements. And I asked, I said, do you have any agreements right now that if something happens to your partner or there's an obligation for you to buy his interest, or he has to buy your interest, or can your spouse run your company? And he says, well, I don't, so it's different with everybody, obviously. And so those are the kinds of questions I ask. And I mean, I got to, they're all there on the fact-finding interview. And so that's how I get. I remember when I was a member of the fair dealing model with the Ontario Securities Commission. When I was asked, and the Know Your Client forum came up, and I started shaking my head. And the head of the committee said, obviously you're in disagreement with this Know Your Client forum. I said, why? I said, well, my fact-finding interview, I spent up from an hour to 2 hours with my clients. And of course, I got these guys over there from stockbrokers firm and said, we can't have our guys spending that kind of time with, understanding their client. I said, do you recognize what you just said? Right? I mean, you're the ones that said the fair dealing model is all about changing from a transaction business to a relationship business. Now you're telling me you don't want to spend the time to actually know your client? Anyway, that didn't go down very well.
No, I clearly remember the argument. We couldn't stay in our business if we only know as much as is on the KYC form before we talk about what they need. All right, so you went to LUACC, did you?
I had to. I had no choice. Tony Law said, you're going.
But you've become over the years very knowledgeable about a lot of things, including tax, and you bore into the act. When did you start learning that?
From day one. I bought a copy of the Income Tax Act, and I've probably been subscribing to a copy. Well, I don't buy it every year now because not much changes anymore, and I can actually add my own addendums to it. But I had this thought at one point of becoming a lawyer, but I got dissuaded by my interviews with the accounting people. And but I studied will planning. The CLU was absolutely instrumental in helping me navigate what I needed to know. If I had to point a finger at one Advocis course, it would be the CLU. I think the CLU course is masterful. I think they should, in fact, I've always recommended they have a master's CLU where they get into deeper tax planning. I had a lawyer, Norman Griesdorf, who was a Queen's Counsel, and he and I were talking about how most law firms don't really do a good job of will planning for their clients. They don't push it. And we were trying to figure out a way of designing a system under the purview of many legal firms where financial advisors could get a diploma in simple will planning. And so that they knew when to refer them to a lawyer, when to do a simple will. And I figured that was doable. Well, he actually died before we spoke to the Law Society. I was going to speak to Advocis about setting up a diploma course, like the estate courses they're offering now, the estate managers course. And but when Norm died, that fell off my desk. But I still think it's a good idea because not enough people have wills.
What else do you think was instrumental in your progress in the early years?
Probably the branch system. There were a lot of people I respected. I saw how hard they worked, which made it model what I needed to do. There were a lot of good people in those agencies and at the LUAC sessions, and the CLUs had study groups at that time. So I'm a distillation of everything I've learned from people giving and offering their intellect and their ideas, and you know, I went to the round table many years. I was quarter of the table at one time, and then I just became disillusioned with some of the talk about how much money these guys made on the stage. It wasn't about solving people's problems anymore. It was get in the annuity business and see how much money you can make, right? And I ended up walking out of one of those things and I never went back.
Those knowledgeable people are still around. How would you recommend people get in touch with them or speak with them now, because branches really don't exist?
Yeah, I've always been, study groups are another way of doing it. I mean, you know, I've shared those study group sessions with you and Toby Hall and Tom McMillan and Ed McMillan and Jeffrey Hall and they brought in speakers like Leo Penny and actuaries, and Jamie Bongard I think was involved in it, and we had really good sessions and that you managed, and they were extremely helpful to me. There's a lot of study groups out there right now, and I think that's one of the biggest important factors if you really want a well-rounded knowledge of tax and will planning and laws, and it's become more complicated over the last 10 or 15 years for sure. But I make sure I do every week. I read about it. You can see the books back here. I subscribed. I probably, I don't know, spend maybe $1,000 or $2,000 a year on making sure all my books are updated. And you know, from Clovers, it used to be CCH, and TFAC. So I mean, I got a session on the Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security at 1 o'clock with Walter Clovers at 1 o'clock. Do I know most of what I need to know with OAS and the Canada Pension Plan? Probably, but you know, maybe there's something I don't know, and so I'm attending the session.
I've always figured that any session was worthwhile if I picked up something I didn't know. Absolutely,
yeah. So I have a constant thirst to know what I need to know, and I think and I've always had that. I mean, I've read the Quran twice only because I got into a conversation with someone about after 9/11 about Muslims, and I said I'm not going to really engage in this kind of a conversation unless I read something and I become knowledgeable, and it's, you know, and I shake my head at what's going on today out there, and I well, in the Middle East I'm talking about. That's just.
But let's stay with insurance. I believe your first mentor in the business was the late great Tony Laws.
Yes.
Tell me about your relationship with him.
Tony knew zip about life insurance. What he did know was hard work. We had to be in the office at 7 o'clock, even if we had evening appointments, right? And we had to be there preparing our work. And he was a good friend of Al Granum, and he bought into the system, left, right, and center. So, and what he did do was teach me. I mean, the whole system was about keeping in touch with people and gaining their confidence. That was and gaining their trust. And if they didn't agree to meet with you the following year, then you dead filed them. You didn't waste any more time on them. You went out after new people. And he taught people how to ask for referrals by doing good work for people, asking them if they've appreciated the work that you've done. And you know, and this was echoed by people like Bruce Etherington and his brother Brian, and echoed by, you know, guys like George Sigerson and you know, sometimes I wonder if I should have gone the other route and just did kitchen table insurance. You know, a lot of those people that are doing that are making good livings, outstanding livings, and they don't have to deal with some accountants and lawyers, and which is difficult to deal with sometimes. But I managed it, and I figured out how to do it. And that's by putting yourself in the shoes of the owner of the company and really talking through his knowledge and feelings about his family. And I find that when I can bring the family aspect to a solution, that I find that you can speak over. I mean, I'm doing one now, and this one accountant is saying, close down all your companies because the actual owner is admittedly to me suffering from dementia. And it's not full dementia, but he's closing all his companies down. And I said, you don't need to close down the holding company because it's got all the assets in there. You don't need to close that down. And here are the reasons, right? And so, once you start advocating on behalf of the family, it's very difficult because, accountants are trained to look at things year by year. They're not really trained to look at things 5-10 years out. And they forget the social aspect of the family. And, because, I mean, there's a difference between living to work and working to live, in my opinion. So that's what I try to bring to the relationship.
You said that Tony believed in a 2-interview sale, not a 1-interview sale. What does that mean?
It means you spend the first interview getting to know the client, asking questions about himself, his business, his family, what he wants out of life, and then think about that, and then come back and you get information about his cash flow and so on and so forth. So when you come back with first of all, you establish that you do have legitimate problems that he hasn't attended to, and you've got solutions that match his ability to pay and his desire to do that. It's a question of how much does he love his family. If the guy says to me, I don't care what happens to my family, I just pack up the bag and get out of there because it's, what I have to say is not going to influence him one way or the other.
Well, that's interesting. So
I've done that. I've done that many, many times.
So is that part of the 10-3-1 of Granum?
No, my numbers ended up being closer to 3 and 4 to 1 rather than 10-3-1. So the 10 becomes 2 or 3 or 4, and when I meet somebody, I end up being able to do a fact-finding interview, and I usually end up with about 2 clients out of that, and 1 later, and I get referrals. So I'm not a huge life seller. I've never have been. I mean, I just go where it takes me, and I've earned a decent living out of it. And I have an employee benefit practice that goes, that I get that business as a result of the work I do on the individual side.
Okay, so you started off with these, by doing what we all did, walking strip malls or strip business malls or whatever, knocking on doors, and doing a little bit of fact finding. And you say that you followed wherever the client led you. So does that mean that your first sale might have been group insurance or individual or disability or?
Well, my first sale was a corporate owned life insurance. And it was key man, and it was a buy-sell agreement. That was my first sale. Actually, that's not true. I bought some insurance. I was my first sale.
with each subsequent client. So as you were walking down through the strip malls and meeting these people, or subsequently getting referrals.
So I went next door and I knocked on the door and I said, I'm doing some work for Adam next door, and he suggested I come and talk to you. Right. So you can position yourself in a much more favorable light by just being cute. Right. And so I did that. And I was reasonably good at talking with people, and I can ingratiate myself to people. And I think, being a little self-deprecating helps in that regard, initially. And I have no problem being self-deprecated because I'm not exactly a perfect individual.
All right, so you go in, you meet with them, you talk with them, and they want group insurance. They say, well, I have 10 employees. What did you do?
I said, well, do you have any employees that stand out that you'd want to treat a little better than the rest? And the guy says, what do you mean? I said, well, you must depend on somebody here. Because you're not here, 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, 365 days a week, a year. He says, well, no, I got Elvio, who I really depend on. So I said, do you want to do something a little extra for him, like separate him out a little bit? And we get talking as to how important people are in his company. Again, that just leads into him talking to me, right? And the more he talks to me, the more he trusts me. And I basically need to know what's up here in his mind. And I find if I can do that and spend, it's the best time spent. It's an investment in a client that's going to be around there for a long time. And I've got clients that I've had for 30 or 40 years now. And I mean, my last, and I don't prospect anymore. I'm sort of semi-retired, so I deal with referrals, and I still get them. A few years ago, I did a guy called me up, and he says, Roger, I've been looking at this file again, and my accountant says we really should do this. And I'm thinking, okay, could you just give me a little idea what we're talking about? And he says, yeah, well, you gave me a presentation. And I said, let me go to the file. And I had to go downstairs to the archives to get it. And I come back and I'm talking to him on the phone. And I said, well, this is dated 18 years ago. I says, yeah, I know, but it makes a lot of sense to us now. I said, okay, well, the numbers are going to be different. Anyway, I ended up selling an $800,000 insurance premium, permanent life insurance, with the blessing of his accountant. And so that's the sort of stuff that I'm doing in the last 4 or 5 years. Regrettably, the other side of the coin is I've paid out more death claims in the last 4 or 5 years than my entire career.
The former, though, is a great example of there's no one with endurance like the person who sells insurance, or as it used to be, the man who sells insurance.
Yeah.
And you never know where your next great sale is going to come from.
And I used to do all of his employee benefits too. He's got over 120 employees, and he came to me and he says, Roger, my best friend's son is in the business now, and I want to give him the employee benefit. And I said, okay.
Did you do the employee benefits yourself?
I started to, and then I got into third-party administration, and it got very burdensome for me with all the renewals. So I ended up, I used to do Harry Rosen's employee benefits, and I lost it to, at the time, Sun Life, to another agent who was dealing with Sun Life, and the pricing actuary, I found out who the pricing actuary was who undercut my renewal, and Dennis and I hired him. So he does all of our group renewals, and I think he makes more money than all of us now, because he deals with myself, Dennis Jr., and about 4 other advisors, and he knows all the pricing people and all the major companies, and I mean, we haven't lost a group case since.
The Dennis you're referring to is Dennis Gaponi.
Yeah.
You went into business with him, or not into business, but you have a business that you
We shared expenses. So, and we were in the same office on Eglinton Avenue.
And how did that work?
It was fabulous. It was good. I mean, I moved to Eglinton Avenue because the drive into Toronto was getting excruciatingly harder, like 2 hours driving, and each way. So it's so Dennis and I he moved out of downtown Toronto to Eglinton Avenue, and I moved with him, and we shared receptionists and we shared office managers, and after a while, I wasn't even going in there for a long time, and I've had more people come to my farm here than I ever did in the office in Toronto. Like, they just want to come out and look at the horses.
And people like to go for a drive in the country.
Yeah. And so I don't have as many interviews anymore, but people do come out here for, and I got one employee, which is actually my daughter now, and the only problem with hiring a member of your family is you can't fire them.
So, unlike your father who fired you.
Yeah.
How did you replace the collegiality of the branch office?
Study groups originally study groups, but then it became more and more difficult. And I have to admit to you, I find it a little lonely at times. So I have to go in search of people, and I go to lunch with. I mean, we just came back from Calgary, and we had 8 guys who were all ex-Canada Life people: Andy Galatly, Fly Shacker, Scott Feeminster, Mark Wolfter, Dennis Capone. Bob Cowan was supposed to come out, but he had a cancer issue problem, and he begged out. But what you do is, after you finish playing golf, you sit around and you talk about this and that, and so that became the partly as a substitute. Now, I joined a couple of years ago because of this fact that I wasn't seeing enough people, of my own. And I've been doing a lot of Zoom, and I'm taking the CHS course to fulfill my hours of CE courses, and I paid for the CHS course 3 times because I found it boring. Because again, my background is helping to build and develop an income replacement product with Canada Life, and I just found some of the stuff in there pedantic, and I just lost patience with it. But eventually, I stuck it out, and I did the first CHS 303, and I'm going to do the 505 one soon before I go to Florida.
And that's a health specialist degree.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else do? You do a lot of scuba diving, and you go south. I imagine do that. Well,
I don't do as much scuba diving now because we got a place on the West Coast, and it's really shitty diving. And because it's shallow, and I mean, I actually bumped into a 600-pound grouper, and I didn't see the damn thing because it was so sunny. That was so sandy and turgid, and I could hear him. I could hear him barking, but underwater, you have no idea what direction it's coming from. Somebody actually, through Dan in the University of Miami, they discovered in order to hear the direction of sound underwater, your ears need to be 4 feet apart. So that wasn't. I know I got a bit of a big head, but not that big.
But I think you have to stretch it. The masks.
So I did that for many years, to Tony's chagrin, because I would go like 4 or 5 times a year to Fort Lauderdale, and they got to know me so well that when I drove in with a rental car, the doorman just took my one bag where I had my clothes, and he checked me in. I just went directly to the dive boat. So it was kind of fun. And I met some interesting people there. This friend Bob Sheridan, he was the dive master, and it was his boat we were on. And he said, I need you down here. I need you to be the stern guy. So he didn't tell me this, but there were 6 guys on the boat that were all Northwest Mutual employee agents. And they're all talking about universal life. So I turned and I asked them a question about, so are you happy with the fact that the policyholder is assuming some of the risk? And my buddy doing this, she's like, shut up.
Did you ever mix the diving and your business? Did you ever find clients or prospect while you were diving?
No, that was my time.
What do you mean?
No, when I went diving, apart from that one incident, when I went diving, first of all, you have to pay attention to what you're doing, right? I mean, it's not exactly a sport that's without risk. And so I never mixed anything. I mean, you listen to people for sure. I mean, there was one time I used to go to this place in Fort Lauderdale called Evangeline's. I was there one night listening to a woman play the electric violin, and I sat and chatted with her for a while, and she was a lawyer from New York. She gave it all up to do this, and so we were talking away, and then some guy comes over and he joins us, and she takes off and does her second set, and he says, I've seen you in here several times. What do you do for a living? And I said, I'm in the insurance business. And he says, really? Well, it's strangely you say that, but my accountant said I need a couple $1 million of insurance in my company. Can you do that? And I said, yeah. Anyway, I ended up getting my license down in Florida. You had to go through the fingerprinting and all the rest of that stuff. And so when I went back down there with the illustrations, I got pulled over by U.S. Customs, and I got denied entry.
No green card.
Yeah. And I said, well, what about NAFTA? He says, that's bullshit. Right. I said, well, the state of Florida gave me a license. He said, they're just taking your fees. You can, anyway, so I had to call Alan Loney at Canada Life in Atlanta on the phone so that he would confirm that he wouldn't accept any applications from me. So then they let me in on the next flight. I missed my hop to Virgin and Gorda to go diving, but I went on the next plane. I missed my first dive. So, you know, and then I was delayed. Then I was detained in secondary for maybe 4 or 5 years after that. And then a good friend of mine who is with the RCMP Undercover Drug Squad, he said, I need to use your patio on Saturday. I got guys from the DEA coming in. So they all came in, and I told him this story, and he said, let me see your passport. So I go upstairs and get my passport and write something down. The next thing I went through clean. And I'm thinking, they must have done something, right? So anyway, I thought, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. So I phoned my buddy. I said, did your friends from the DEA do anything? You know, he says, can't tell you.
No, because if you didn't know. So, you also do you have clients across Canada?
No, mostly west of Yonge Street.
Like Calgary?
No, west of Yonge Street to where I live now. So in between Yonge Street and where I live. Yeah. If I had a lead out there, I'd call Ballard or Woofter or something. You know, I think it's important to have somebody local.
Do you do any split commission work? Do any
Yep.
split cases?
Yeah, I do. I've had a few people come to me with cases. I do split commission work with my son. I mean, his biggest cases are ones that I worked on, and with him, and we split right down the middle, like anybody else.
Is he in the business with you any longer?
Not with me, but he is in the business. So he's got a contract with IDC, and you know, he does more wealth and employee benefits than life insurance, but that's because he doesn't take the time to ask questions enough.
Do you do any wealth work?
Not much. It's, I mean, I do some. I do most of my wealth work is with retained earnings in corporations. I've probably got maybe, and I guess I got pension plans, right? Corporate pension plans. I've probably got about 25 million assets under management. Not a lot.
Do you do the pension plans yourself?
I do pension plans myself, yeah.
How did you learn to do them?
Well, my first one was I unwound Harry Rosen's defined benefit pension plan for them. Got that unfunded liability off their books before the international rules changed. And then I got dumped. But by the same token, you know, one door closes, another opens. That was taking an awful lot of my time because I was doing personnel work, for crying out loud. I still have. No, I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
You talked about Tony Law's attitude to China eggs, to people who didn't want to talk with you this year, and yet you also
no. I keep them on for about a year, right? So I send them a birthday card, and I phone them next year, the anniversary of the date I call them, and ask them if they would like to meet with me to do a fact-finding interview. If they say no to that, then I discard them.
So you've had clients come back to you 18 years later. Have you ever had prospects who didn't do anything come back to you?
No, because they're not in my. Honestly, yeah, no.
So do you think following up with clients, keeping contact, is part of the way to get them to keep in touch with, come back to you when they need something?
Probably is. It's a lesson I should have learned 40 years ago. But I can't think of one prospect that I have now that's not a client. I mean, it's, but back then maybe I should have been a little bit more patient.
Well, okay.
It's a good point. I mean, it's a good point, but I think that's a personal decision. Sometimes when you're speaking to somebody, you get a sense of whether they're serious about you wanting you to stay in touch. So that's the judgment call that you make.
Did you develop any telltales to tell whether somebody was actually the type of client you wanted to deal with?
Oh, you could tell from the answers to the questions that I offered. Like, you have to find someone that A, has an economic need, B, loves their family, wants to do something about protecting. So they identify all of that. And that's the only reason that I would stay in touch with somebody, even for a year.
That was the old, they have to be intelligent enough to understand what you're talking about, motivated enough to do something about it.
Yeah. And you have an indication that they really want to do something. And so you have to determine whether if they can make an intelligent, informed decision about something.
But you're also really a relationship guy, aren't you?
Oh, more than anything else, yeah.
How do you develop the relationship with clients?
By asking a lot of questions and listening to what they say. And I have never forced a sale in my entire career. To me, a sale is a series of steps. And if you complete everything properly, you're gonna close the case. Right. So I just, and if it takes 5 interviews or 5 years, so be it. I mean, the key to being patient is to work hard.
When you started out, you had a young family, a very young family.
3 kids, yeah. Well, actually, 1 kid, and then 2 came along while I was in the business.
And yet you were an equally skilled guy. Well, you were in management for a moment and a half.
Yeah.
Probably what management?
I had the highest producing sales team in Canada for Canada Life at the time. So I mean, I benefited from Canada Life's retirement compensation arrangement after 1989 when they switched from their pension plan. That's the only way they could fund it was because of the contract, right? The way the contract promised to put money back in. So we all took lower incomes for future benefits. So.
When did you move from management and why?
That's a good question. Can you hang on a second? I'll find out. Can you give me 2 seconds?
It's okay. Why did you move?
Why? Because they wanted me to move to Winnipeg, and I didn't want to do that.
So then what did you do? That's got to be a big change going from a salary to commission.
Not really, because I was always, to their chagrin, I always produced, right? So and they wanted me to stop producing if I went to Winnipeg. Well, what they did is they kept paying me for 6 months after I made the change. They were really good about it.
They were a very good company, and I still are.
Yeah.
So Roger, you have, as I understand it, 3 real areas of specialization: corporate, particularly closely held corporate situations.
Yeah.
With key person and buy sell being the core of that. Group insurance and pension insurance. Is that right?
Well, I include the pension along with the group, so that's all one. But I actually do the pension myself. I spent hours and hours and hours at the Pension Commission of Ontario going through their files when I had to do this, winding up this pension thing. I probably saved the company maybe 45 or 50 grand in consulting fees by doing it myself.
How did you, well, let's go back to that because
well, when I was in the U.S. division, I was involved with U.S. Pension Trust, right? So I had a little bit of experience starting pension plans, winding them down. I had to communicate with all 50 states, and of course, because Canada Life did business in New York State, they determined what the wording would be for. And so you're writing letters to 50 state insurance companies supervisors. And they're writing you back saying, I want to change to this wording, and you read it and it doesn't make any, to me, it didn't seem different, right? So I thought, whoa, anyway, I learned a lot about pensions and pension trusts. And again, David Neal kind of taught me about defined benefit pension plans a little bit. He was running the U.S. division at the time, and he had a little bit more time than he did as president. And so I just learned as I went, right? And This stuff you can learn. I mean, all you have to do is have an open mind. And I used to tell people you got to be a sponge. You know, when you're starting in this business, you got to be a sponge. You get and take the time. I mean, I get up early, so I read. I'm looking behind you. I've got the same. I got books like coming out of my yin yang here, and I read them all. And I probably read as much fiction as I do nonfiction and textbooks and stuff. I learned to speed read when I was in the business maybe 5 or 6 years. And my pile started getting bigger and bigger and bigger because I just didn't have the time to read everything. So I took a couple of speed reading courses, and so I can read quickly, especially text that is around financial and tax legislation, and I can read because some of the stuff you don't need to read. Right, it's just filler.
Once you learn what not to read.
Yeah.
For over 40 years, you've been involved in the association, or you were involved in the association.
Yeah.
And that's pretty time consuming, particularly doing what you did as president and with all the committees. Why did you do that?
Somebody had to do it. I didn't wake up one morning and say I'm going to do this because it's going to make me feel important. There's an expression, it's miseris secere disco, which is Latin for to succor the distressed. That's my family motto. That's the McMillan clan family motto. And so I just filled a gap. I just filled a vacuum.
Well, you certainly did. When the president or the chair of Advocis, I believe it was Advocis at the time, died, you stepped in. You were vice chair, and you served 2 terms. You're one of the few people who do that.
Well, I didn't have much choice. So, what do you do? I mean, it says a lot about people if they decide to turn their back on, someone or something in need.
But there were years when it must have taken most of your time.
It did.
How do you prepare for that? What does your business look like in order to be able to live while you're doing that?
I just meant I put in more hours. I dived less. I spent less time with the family. It does take time. I was one of the ones that I think at the time the honorarium for the chair was $12,000 a year to pay some expenses, and I was the one that pushed for it to be increased, and I think it got increased when I left. The person who came in after me got $36,000, and so on and so forth. But even that isn't, when you look at the people that serve in that chair role. Maybe some of them have a better office staff than I did, because I didn't have an office staff when I did this. So you do what you need to do during the daytime, and I spent more evenings with my clients.
You do a lot of long-term work for clients. I mean, we have talked over the years about you're helping with the unwinding of estates.
Yes.
Can you still do that readily with all the conflict of interest rules? And how do you circumnavigate?
I'm not sure, but I do it because people need the help. And I don't. There is no conflict of interest. I mean, I tell people that I have disclosures documents. I think I used the one that you provided. I have disclosure documents coming out of my yin yang in my files, and I tell people, that the industry says I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm doing it. So if somebody wants to take me to task because I'm helping somebody and nobody's complaining, then they can do so.
Talk about documenting your files. Did you always do it? And how did you?
No. I started doing it after I was involved with the best practices manual, which is probably one of the most underused resources that Advocis has. I mean, it's a tremendous it's a tremendous useful resource, and I think something like 4 or 5% of the population at Advocis uses it. So But and of course, in our study group with you nagging at us all the time, I've become very conscious about compliance, and I am compliant. I mean, I've passed all kinds of compliance tests going. I don't agree with some of the conflicts, but if you say you might have a conflict and the client signs off on saying I'm aware of it, that's it. And nothing I do in terms of unwinding estates accrues to me, and I actually do it pro bono. I don't charge for it because I can't stand being I couldn't stand registering, charging fees and having to send HST to the government.
I will admit it can be onerous, the HST part. Roger, so you develop these relationships with clients.
Yeah.
And
just to be clear, I don't do this day in, day out. I do it for specific people that need the help, right? That I've become close to.
No, but we're talking about the long-term relationships. So you've dealt with these clients over time. Has it progressed to the next generation as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that case that I told you about earlier, that's one good example. We've had a stock redemption put in place for the 4 kids, and we've got $7 million of insurance on each of them, which is not enough. I'm going to do some more.
And how
that's just to pay that's the down payment on their buyout, and the down payment's enough to pay the capital gains tax. That's what.
How do you develop the relationship with the next generation?
Hasn't been difficult, because the parents said you talk to Roger. You do if you do good work and they trust you, it's just going down one step. It's a flight of stairs.
So it all comes down to give the client what they want and then go back and give them what they need.
I think that's part of the same Venn diagram. I mean, clients know that what they want, they're not going to get all the time. And you have to redefine what it is that they want that you can help with. Right. So, because I'm not all things to all people. And I mean, I get asked about stuff that I really shouldn't even be involved in. And I tell them that. I said, that's between you and your daughter. I can't interject there. I said, I have a hard enough time with my 2 daughters. So don't look for any expert advice from me.
If somebody young came to you now, whether they're going into the business or going into another business, what advice would you give?
Do what you say you're going to do. Be on time. Say please and thank you.
I agree with all of this.
It's not difficult. It's not difficult.
Define be on time for me.
Well, 4 things. I've always said, and I write this. I have a journal. Every year I do a journal. Right? And it's this thing here. This is for next year. And at the front of it, and every year I renew my vows, so to speak. My mission statement is to assist people in making smart decisions about their money, to help people create, manage, and preserve their wealth. Do what you say, finish what you start, turn up on time, and say please and thank you. That's it. That's what I live my life on.
You and I have been to a lot of meetings together. Define be on time to me.
Well, if you say first of all, I'm every meeting, unless I'm in a traffic jam, and I will call, but I'm actually on time to start a meeting, and I'm usually there early. And so be on time, and keep meetings as much. Now that's not to say I have opportunities where I have to rearrange meetings. Sometimes it's impossible not to, but be on time is just that. Be on time. And if I say I'm going to do something, I think most people depend that I'm going to do it. I mean, I had a lunch meeting with an old friend yesterday, and we made we made it 2 weeks ago, and he knew that unless he heard from me to the contrary, that I was going to be there. So he didn't worry that I was going to be there.
That's being reliable, being dependable, being accountable.
Well, how else do you get people to trust you?
I don't know of any way. Well, my mother used to say bullshit baffles brains, but I'm never so sure about that one.
You always get caught up in bullshit. Always get caught up. You can't sleep nights with bullshit.
I know as we get older, sleeping becomes more and more important.
Yeah.
So Roger, somebody new in the business, without the branch operation, what advice would you give them about learning the business?
I would advise them to, well, I think of IDC, you know, they do a really good job of education. They have a lot of sessions, and if I were someone new in the business, I would say find a good managing general agent and go to everything that they offer, because it's out there, and it's for the most part doesn't cost you anything, or it's minimal. Right. So, I mean, I've enjoyed all of IDC's sessions, for example. And I pick and choose now what I go to, because I don't want to sit there and twiddle my thumbs saying, I know this, I know this, I know this.
What, joining an association?
Oh, without doubt, I think it's important, and we're going down a rabbit hole here.
Then what about specialization? Is that something that you would recommend?
I think if I was to mentor somebody to come into the financial services business, I would get them to start with family insurance. Write as many lives as you can insurance, whether it's term insurance, part term, part whole life, disability insurance. That's what I think that provides a good grounding of talking to people and finding out, because people need to provide life insurance or capital for their family before they, I mean, if a 25-year-old is just starting his job, he doesn't really need to worry about his pension at this point in the stage. And if he's got a young family, he needs to look after that first. There'll be time to start dealing with pension accumulation. So I think the life insurance industry is a really good grounding for people that want to be in the financial service business for themselves, not as an employee of a bank or an investment firm.
You talked about the importance of study groups in your career. What about joining a study group? And how would you suggest they find them?
Well, I think Advocis has a mentorship program. I don't know too much about it, but I think just by asking around, find some old fart like me and ask them, who do you know has got a study group? That's what I would do.
What about
I'm aware there's lots of them out there, or start their own.
And what
about I'm going to say, and if you have any questions, phone Lawrence Geller. He'll tell you how to do it.
And I think I may end up with an unlisted number. What about finding a mentor?
I think that only comes from going to some meetings and, you know, go to these IDC meetings and talk to people and figure out who you can associate with and who strikes you as being someone that you want to listen to. I think that's trial and error, but you've got to have an active plan to do it.
Have a plan. Is having a plan important in everything?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, I plan what books I'm going to read. I mean, I know I have an hour every morning. When I wake up, I have a cup of tea or coffee and I read. And, you know, I used to listen to the news, but that's depressing these days. And so I read, and I've started reading a little bit more philosophical books now, rather than actual technical books. But I do try to keep up on everything, and I I'm serious about my continuing education studies, and it's getting harder and harder to find good continuing educational material without it being, you know, a dog and pony show. And so it's hard work to plan. But by the same token, you know, I mean, my whole career has been about planning. So I think I do a lot of it intuitively now. I keep a journal, you know, and every morning I have a to-do list and I check them off as I do them. And if I can't finish it that day, it goes to the next day, already preordained. And and partly because I don't remember everything anymore. And, but I find this keeps me organized.
That's a very good suggestion. Well, thank you, Roger.
I have 30 years of, I was just downstairs in my archives. I have 30 years of these binders. 30 years, these, all lined up. One of these days I'm going to read them.
I have a partner's desk on the other side.
Yeah.
Was full of years and years of my journals.
Yeah.
And now box downstairs, so it's the same thing.
I used to do those daytimers, but I find they got hard to read after a while.
Well, thank you, Roger. Next week, Thursday, September 26th, we have Steve Meldrum with us, and Barry Pascal will be interviewing him. And the following week, on October the 3rd, Morty Sachs, who is a great industry legend, will be here. Again, Barry Pascal will be interviewing him. And the following week, I'll be interviewing Sandy Pollock. So we still have the remainder of the year. I think there are 11 more interviews scheduled. And we look forward to seeing you for the remainder of the Meet the Masters of Insurance webinar series. Thank you, Roger McMillan, for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And thank you, Krista Barzo, for the technical assistance. We look forward to seeing you next week with Steve Meldrum and Barry Pascal. Thank you all.